Sometimes if we copy and paste data from a website into Excel, it gives us a hyperlink as part of the value. But what if we want to get the address of that hyperlink? Well, that's not so easy. So in this video, we'll briefly look at some of the manual techniques we can use if we've only got, say, one or two, but then we'll launch into some automated methods that will handle everything at once. So if you're ready, let's get started. Here is our example file, and it contains a table called courses. In that table, the first column contains the name of a course. That name also includes a hyperlink. So if I click on any one of those cells, it now goes to that relevant web page and opens up that hyperlink. Now obviously we could select the hyperlink in the address bar, press Ctrl+C. We could then go back to Excel and then paste that hyperlink into the cell. But that's not very efficient. Firstly, we have to click on the link, then go to the page and then copy and paste. Even with manual methods, there are better methods than clicking the link. Here I have my cell selected and we want to go to the Edit Hyperlinks window. We can find that in various ways. We can go to the Insert ribbon, and then in the link section, we can click the button that brings us to the Edit Hyperlink section. We can also get there by right-clicking and going to Edit Hyperlink on the right-click menu. And finally, we can press Ctrl and K. That also gets us to the same place. By default, our address will already be selected. We can press Ctrl+C to copy that. I'll then press Escape to come out of our hyperlinks window. I'll press right and then I can paste the value into that cell. We can then move across and down and go through that same process. So if you're a shortcut fan, we can press Ctrl+K, Ctrl+C, Escape, right arrow, Ctrl+V, left and down. And then we can repeat that process for each item in our list. That's going to get pretty tedious pretty quick. So now let's look at some automated methods, and we're starting with a VBA Custom Function. The key point here is that the hyperlink is not part of the value itself, but it's associated with the range in which the value exists. Therefore, we need to get the hyperlink from the range and not from the value. One way to achieve that is with a VBA Custom Function. To open up the VBA editor, I'll press Alt and F11. Here we can see the workbooks that I currently have open, and we are working with our GetHyperlinks workbook. I'm going to right-click on that workbook, go to Insert and select Module. This now creates a new code window for us to enter our VBA code. We want to create a function. So we're going to use the word function. We are going to call our function GetHyperlink. I'll enter an opening bracket. Into this function, we are going to select a cell, and that is the cell that we're going to get the hyperlink for. We're going to call this cell, and this is going to be of a range type. Therefore, we're going to use as and range. I'll then close that bracket at the end. When I press return, it automatically adds the end of the function. We have now created a function that we can use inside Excel, and that function accepts a single argument called cell. The problem is our function doesn't currently do anything. We're going to say that we want GetHyperlink. That is the result of our function. We want that to be equal to the cell value. So that's whichever cell we select. From that, we want to get the hyperlinks. Now the hyperlinks are part of a collection. Each cell only contains one item. Therefore, in brackets, we want the hyperlink index of 1. That will return the hyperlink itself, but we don't want the hyperlink, we want the text or the address of that hyperlink. Therefore, I'll enter a dot and add address. And that's it, we're done. Our function will now return the value from a hyperlink. So let's close our VBA editor. Let's come back to Excel. We're going to type equal, and our function was called GetHyperlink. I can see that there. I'll press Tab to accept that. In the bracket, I will select our cell value. I'll close that and calculate. Fantastic, that now gives us all of the hyperlinks from those values. And because this is a table, it means all of those calculations are copied down automatically. Now, the thing here is that we need this function to be inside the workbook. If the function isn't in the workbook, it will create an error. Therefore, we have to save this as a macro-enabled workbook with the .xlsm extension, which may not be what you want. So let's go and take a look at another VBA method where we don't have to save the code in this specific workbook. We're now back in the Visual Basic Editor, and I have already inserted the code that we are going to use for this next example. If you want to get a copy of this code, it will be available in the video description and also within the example file downloads. The macro that we have created is called InsertHyperlinks. At the start, we create 4 variables: source range, target range, I, and J. After that, we set the onError resume next. This means that if we encounter an error, the macro will keep running. After that, we use the application.input box. This will bring up a box on screen where we can select the range that we want to use as our source range. This is the range that contains the hyperlinks. The next line of code handles the scenario where somebody clicks cancel on that input box. If that occurs, then our macro stops running. Next, we display another input box so we can select the range of where we want to place our hyperlink values. And also, if somebody clicks cancel on that box, we are going to stop our macro running. After that, we loop through each cell in that target range. And in there, we insert a value. And that value is based on the hyperlink from the corresponding cell in our source range. And finally, at the end, we turn error checks back on. This code could be inserted into any workbook. It's designed to work on the active sheet. Therefore, if you saved it in your personal macro workbook, when you run the code, it will apply it to whatever workbook you're currently working on. So let's go and see this macro in action. To run this macro, I'll go to the View ribbon. Then on the far right, we have macros as an option. I'll select that. We can see Insert Hyperlinks. That's the macro we created. And I'll click Run. It asks us what range of cells contains the hyperlinks. I will select those and click OK. It asks us where we want to place the results. I'll select those cells and click OK. Fantastic, that's it. We now have our hyperlink addresses in each of our cells. But the thing to be aware of is that these are now hard-coded values. But it also means that if we have our VBA code saved outside of this workbook, that we no longer need to save this as a macro-enabled workbook. We can save it as a standard Excel workbook. Now, lots of you are probably thinking, my company has blocked VBA. I certainly don't want to use the manual methods, so is there another way? And the answer is yes. And that's what we're going to look at next with an Office script-based solution. If you have not used Office scripts before, we can find them in the Automate tab. Here are our scripts. You can see I've already got my script created, but for you to create a new script, you would go to New Script and then Create in Code Editor. On the right, that would then create a new script with some example code. And that is the window where you could enter the example that we are working through now. If you want to get the code for this script, it will be available in the video description and also in the example file downloads. I'm going to close that window because I already have my GetHyperlinks code ready. I will expand the window and I'll click Edit to view the code. In the function declaration, our first parameter is called workbook. That refers to the workbook that we are currently working with. The next parameter is source address. This is going to be a text value which represents the cells that contain our hyperlinks. After that, we have another parameter called target address. This will be a text value that represents the range of where we want to enter the hyperlink values. Because we have declared source address and target address within the function declaration, it means that when we run this script, it will ask us to provide values for those parameters. Within the function itself, we have created two variables, source range and target range. These use the workbook, then they get the active worksheet, and after that it then gets a range. And the range that it gets is based on either the source address or the target address. Next, we create a variable called array. The purpose of this is to create an array of values where we can insert the hyperlink values. Effectively, this is a temporary array in which we will replace all of the values. Just like the VBA example, where we looped through every row and every column, we do the same thing in Office Scripts. So we are looping through each cell in our target range. We find if there is a corresponding value in the source range. If there is, we get the cell, then we get the hyperlink, and from that we get the address. Now, if there isn't an equivalent cell, or it doesn't contain a hyperlink, it will create an error. Therefore, we have placed this in a try and catch statement. So, if there is a hyperlink, our array value will change to return the hyperlink value. But if there is an error, it will return an empty text string. That then completes the looping process, and we have an array that contains all of those hyperlinks. Finally, we take our target range and we set the values of that range to be equal to the array of the hyperlinks. The important thing to realize about Office scripts is that they are saved outside of the workbook. Therefore, they can be used on any of your workbooks. Now, I've already saved my script and it's called GetHyperlinks. I'm going to close this script window, and here I have my GetHyperlinks script. I'm going to right-click on that script and select Run. This now brings up our parameter window and it asks what values do we want to use for our source address and also our target address. In here, we can provide any valid range reference. For example, we could enter B4 : B11, and that would refer to our course values. But we can also use table structured references. Our table is called courses, and our column is called course. Let's do the same for our hyperlink column. The table is courses, and the column is called hyperlink. So now when we click Run, it's going to use both of those ranges. It will pass them into our script, it will get the hyperlinks, and then insert them into our target range. And as you can see, we now have those hyperlinks. Once again, they are hard-coded values, but because our script is saved outside of our workbook, we can save this as a standard .xlsx workbook. And that is how we can get a hyperlink address from a value using manual and automated methods. Now, if you're thinking, I'd like to understand more about Office scripts, you know where to go. You can see the value right here, exceloffthegrid.com/office-scripts. And if we click the hyperlink, it tells you about the course. Office scripts are a new technology which enable us to automate Excel and run tasks while we sleep. Just head on over to exceloffthegrid.com/office-scripts to find out more. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.